Hey there, insecure individuals. Totally talking about ourselves too. And welcome to Just Right Already, the short show for new authors to create pop fiction that means something.
It's filled with tips, real life stories, and terrible advice you should implement at your own risk.
We're helping you break free, get better, and write wilder so that readers can't put your story down, even if they should. I'm your host, Dominic.
Dominic is a pragmatic pencil monomaniac, and he has an irrational fear of turtles.
And Katy is our freelance pirate fan and disaffected college student. But no, not really.
We're novel writers and story lovers who really need to stop talking and get back to writing.
So today we are talking about receiving feedback. Episode 1 was all about giving feedback. Now it's about receiving feedback. Katy, what are most people doing wrong when it comes to receiving feedback?
Well, if you're like me, then you are probably very insecure about your writing. And you probably are the type of person who, thanks to the negativity bias, can receive 20 compliments and one piece of constructive feedback and just ignore the 20 compliments and only remember the one piece of constructive feedback and then go cry about how you failed at life.
I don't know if it's just not you. That's me too. I obsess over the negativity. Like one comment ruins my day, and it really is silly, especially maybe they're having a bad day or something. And that can shortcut your whole enjoyment of writing and so on. You focus on all the wrong things, what are some ways that we should, well, you actually mentioned negativity bias. What is that before we start going into some of the answers and tips?
Yeah, sure. The negativity bias is a little evolutionary quirk that human beings have from the caveman days, right? Where the caveman, to survive, you really had to put all of your focus on things that were bad. So it didn't matter if you had a nice family and you had, some berries to eat. If there was a saber-toothed tiger about to hunt you down, that kind of took all your attention and you had to focus on that. Now, in the modern world, we don't have the problem of saber-toothed tigers anymore. At least I don't, but that still doesn't stop me from forgetting all the positive things in my life and focusing on the fact that I am out of burritos or something.
That can absolutely be as crushing as not having or having a saber tooth coming after you. So yeah, it's this negativity bias, like you say, it's what keeps you safe. It's like half of your brain is always being aware of, am I in danger? Am I going to survive the day? Is this going to hurt? And when we put ourselves out there, we write a story, it's a really personal thing. I mean, it's why it's called, I am with book, or I am with story, because it feels like we're gestating something and it's important and it's beautiful to us. And you're a mom, so you've got that twice over, and it feels scary and vulnerable sharing something that we've worked hard on with the world. So you have 5 things that we can think about to reframe the negativity bias, or how do we receive feedback? So what you got for us, Katy?
Yeah, so number 1 I'm going to say is detach. So first of all, this is way easier said than done. But with practice and with a lot of humility and you can do it, and it's absolutely critical for being able to process feedback. Now, what does detach mean? It means, first of all, try to look at the feedback you're getting as objectively as possible. Don't read into things, for example. A lot of times, I know, me being insecure about my writing, if somebody leaves a neutral comment, I'll start sort of telling myself this story in my head, like, if somebody notes my hero is audacious, I might start thinking, what do they mean by that? Maybe they meant they're actually obnoxious. Like, oh my goodness, she thinks my entire writing is obnoxious. She thinks I'm a failure at life. Like, I'll have this little snowballing thing going on in my brain that just is completely illogical and makes no sense. So I would say, first of all, take those kind of notes at face value, and also remember that your work is not you, right? Your work is definitely a reflection of who you are, but it's an imperfect reflection. Even your best work is an imperfect reflection of who you are, and your true friends are going to love you just as much, whether you're a fantastic writer or a terrible writer. It does not matter.
Okay, that was point number 1. What's point number 2?
Yeah, so point number 2, and this goes for receiving feedback on your writing and literally any feedback you will receive in your life, but it's practice what we call deep listening. Deep listening is when you listen to understand, not to listen to respond, right? I think a lot of times when somebody gives you feedback on something that's very personal, or somebody talks to you about an issue that's very personal, while they're still talking, you're kind of making up your defense in your head, and you're not really hearing what they're saying. And so that doesn't really help anything, right? Because you're not actually processing what they're saying. You're not really hearing what you're saying. You think you know what they're saying, but you don't really. So turn off that internal monologue and just listen to what they're saying. It's hard. All of this is hard.
I think as writers, we have a chance to maybe be or do better than a lot of other people because we're working with characters. And if half the time our characters need to be practicing deep listening with each other, and they don't, and that's why you get drama and stuff in stories. But we're also practicing, I guess you could say, deep listening to our characters. What are they not saying? What do they wish they could be saying? So to kind of allow somebody else that same sort of attention, I think is also important. Also, a quick thought before I forget. Point number 1, you just said, there are some people, like myself, who will hide behind certain safe words when they go to describe somebody's work. Like, so what did you think? Oh, it was interesting. And there's a whole, percentage of us out there who love this word because it's completely non-committal. And of course, the rest of us just like spiral right into like, is it interesting? Good? Is it bad? So again, take it at face value. Maybe they're not really sure yet. And maybe it does come back to us to ask for a little more clearer, kind of feedback. So, okay. So that was points number 1 and points number 2, which was deep listening. What's number 3?
So number 3. So first of all, we've detached emotionally. We have listened to the comment, or if you're writing, you probably get the feedback in writing. So you probably have read the comment and tried to turn off that dialogue. Now the next step is you need to ask clarifying questions.
There we go.
So for example, somebody says like, I lost interest at chapter 3. What you want to do is you want to say, okay, was there a particular spot in chapter 3 that you lost interest? Was it, can you tell me a little bit more about that? So for example, was it the description? Was there too much description, do you think? Where specifically did you lose interest? Or like, what would have made it more interesting is another question you can ask. You lost interest at chapter 3. What could have happened that would have kept you reading is another good clarifying question you can ask to really get them to think, and also so that you know how to fix the problem.
Yeah. So putting you a little bit on the spot here, but what would be a thing that you should not ask when you're like asking for clarity? Like, first of all, don't insult them or ask them why they're idiots, But if they're like, yeah, in chapter 3 it was boring, and then what would not be a helpful way to ask for, some more of that help? Any ideas?
So I don't know if there's a question you could ask besides like, why are you an idiot? Why don't you understand my genius? That would be bad. But I think one thing people do a lot is they'll defend themselves in 2 ways. One, they'll jump in and they'll say, well, actually, this is why that section was great because blah, 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 blah. Or they'll say something like, and I do this all the time, I'm totally guilty. They'll jump in and say, yeah, it was just a first draft, like, I'm still working on it, or they'll go ahead and make a bunch of excuses like, yeah, I know that you're right, but that doesn't help. That's just acknowledging what they're saying. That's not actually asking them for advice on how to solve the problem. So there's a lot of humility, like, involved in receiving and implementing healthy feedback. You have to feel like you don't need to defend yourself. You have to be willing to be embarrassed a little bit. But hey, that's just life.
Yeah. I don't know if this is one of your tips, but it almost seems like a good one would be careful who you're asking feedback from. because that's going to also create a very different context or a different environment for who you're talking to, who's talking to you, who's reading your stuff.
Yeah, well, that actually leads right into the next tip, which is get multiple opinions, right?
Ah, well, there you go.
Mm-hmm. Because the thing about it is, and I found with writing, with writing in a manuscript, right, and having people read it, sometimes somebody will make a note like, this part is totally confusing. Or like they'll ask a question like, wait, why is the character doing this here? And to you, it seems really clear. Like, okay, well, I explained that. I set that up in chapter 3, so that shouldn't be confusing. So usually what I do is I just get a unbiased second opinion, because sometimes the reader has just read it too quickly, or sometimes they're not part of the target audience for it, right? So they might just not get it. It might not be their kind of thing.
Right,
but if I
right.
get 2 or 3 separate people tell me that there's a problem with something, then I absolutely know, okay, this is not just that one reader got confused. This is actually a problem that I need to resolve.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so now I'm kind of wondering if we could have life tip or life hack 3.5, where you're like, just bilocate and then read your own stuff. I'm kidding. Okay, so tip number 4, what you got for us?
So tip number 4 is, okay, so pay attention to non-verbal feedback. And I say this with a caveat, right? Because I just told you earlier not to read into things, okay? Mm-hmm. So this only applies to positive feedback. Don't use this for negative feedback, right? So for example, how fast does your beta reader finish reading? So if they take a long time, that is not necessarily a bad sign. I am super busy. I've got 4 kids. I've got a job. It takes me forever to read books, even books that I just really love. But if they like sit down and burn through that thing in one day, and you don't have to keep reminding them, that's a really good sign. So take that as a positive sign. Or like if they come to you unsolicited and start asking you questions about the characters, that's a really great sign. The more they engage with you without you having to prompt them, the better a sign that is.
That's awesome. Yeah, no, that's very true. If somebody, yeah, and then if someone goes through it way too quickly and then comes back with a whole bunch of negative feedback, half the time I'm like, I don't think you actually really read it. You just kind of skimmed through it and you looked for nouns and verbs. I mean, I'm a total skim reader. Mm-hmm. So that's the only way I'm able to survive each day is like I read really quickly, pick one thing to talk about and send it back. And if it's not positive, I just don't say anything. I mean, unless they're begging. But if someone like skimming and then they provide negative feedback, it's possible they didn't actually sit with it enough, Or maybe it was absolutely terrible and you just got to own that.
Well, you also just got to remember that you can't make everybody happy. That's the most important thing is you could write the perfect novel, like the most perfect novel that's ever been written, and there still would be a lot of people who don't like it, and that's okay. We're diverse human beings for a reason. What makes me laugh might not make you laugh. That's totally the beautiful human experience.
Thank you, Katie. Those are cool. The 5 tips are going to be really helpful. Of course, if you can bilocate, that's always a plus. So thanks for those who joined in today from, I don't know what you were doing, smoothie blending. Thanks for skipping that to listen in. Half the time, we don't know what we're going to say, but it's got to be good because your writing life depends on it. Well, not really.
But one of these episodes might explode your brain with an idea. You'll write a story and completely change your life.
We sure hope so. Some of these that we're going to keep talking about absolutely have done that for us. So let us know what you think. Rate us 5 stars or we'll ban you from the dark side and you can't have the cookies.
Yeah, now turn off these podcasts and get back to writing, please.
Subscribe to this podcast at catholicauthor.us. Check us out. Join us. And now, just write already.